Hello and welcome to Low Volume Small Form Factor.net's podcast. My name is Josh Ramirez, and today we have a bit of an abbreviated episode, for lack of a better term. I am joined by one and only one other J, but it's a good one. It's James Schell. Aibohphobia on the forum. James, how you doing?
Doing good. It's nice to be back. It's been a long time, especially for listeners, because due to extenuating circumstances, the last episode has yet to be edited. So sorry about that. So hopefully we can get this one out in a little bit shorter time frame.
Yes. We've been struggling to get schedules to work, and we've always tried to have at least three folks, and usually the whole cast on for podcasts, but we just couldn't stand waiting any longer. Wanted to get this one out, have some stuff to talk about, so we'll be publishing soon, but we appreciate the patience. Kind of ironic that this happens like immediately following our 1 year celebration. I guess we're still reeling from the hangover of that. All right. Well, in any case, putting that aside, do have a brief announcement to make pertaining to or do we have a brief announcement to make? You just deleted it.
Oh yeah, that was leftover. So no. I think I talked about it last episode. That has yet to be posted. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're just going to jump into the news, and the first topic of conversation that I want to cover, and James, you might be a little more knowledgeable about some of this, but naturally the 470 and 460 graphics cards that AMD has been talking about and that have come out, and obviously the 480 was kind of a big deal. I was actually particularly interested in it because it seemed that they're really doing a lot to bring a pretty significant amount of power down to the 200 or so price point. Obviously, these kind of hope to further filter down the line. It'll be a while before AMD has anything to sort of counter the 970 or 1070 or 1080 level stuff. But it was kind of neat to see this, and obviously NVIDIA's released the 1060 as well. So can you tell me a little bit more about what we've got here? Or?
So AMD launched the 470s and then 460s. What was this, like a few weeks ago, I think, now at this point?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's just kind of, they had the 480 a while ago, and so it's just kind of continuing down the stack, just kind of bringing it to lower price points. Honestly, I mean, the performance per dollar is really good. I'll give them that. But from an SFF perspective, I've been a little disappointed with the performance per watt. Because they talked it up, and it is much better than say a 290X or something. Huge step up. So
that's not much of a bar to.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, at least it's improving. It's not getting worse, because that would have been terrible. So it is better than their previous stuff. But I mean, it's still nowhere close to the 1060 or 1070 or 1080s. Because Tech Power Up has these great performance per watt charts. And I think a 1080, of course, 1080 is much more expensive than a 460 or 470. But I mean, it's about 2 times the performance per watt.
Wow.
Yeah, 2x. And then the 1070 and 1060s are right up there too. So that was a bit disappointing. But as far as performance per dollar, though, I mean, they are really compelling parts. Though both AMD and NVIDIA this kind of time around are kind of playing it a little hazy with the MSRP game. Because NVIDIA, especially with their Founders Editions, the Founders Edition's $100 more, but the normal ones are going to be $100 less than that. But mostly it's a stock issue. Just nobody has stock. But that turned out to be not true at all. They all sell for either founder price or even more. And then AMD is kind of the same thing. It's MSRP, but then nobody actually released cards at MSRP. They all came above MSRP. So I think it's a little disingenuous to do that. Because part of the problem, I guess, is AMD did not come out with reference versions of the 470 and 460. So, I mean, a hypothetical reference card may have been that, but like none of the aftermarket cards are. So, and so I don't know. Like the 470s, especially like some of the like high end overclocked ones with the fancy coolers, like some of them are getting close to 480 prices. So
Yeah.
it really becomes questionable. Like, why would you buy a 470 when for a little bit more money you can just go buy a 480, which would be a lot better performance? Yeah.
So what would you say right now are kind of like actual prices for mid-range 460 or 470 that you could hop on Newegg and actually purchase today, roughly?
Okay. Actually, I'm looking it up right now because I don't remember. I haven't.
Well, and plus it probably changes.
Yeah,
a
I
bit day to
haven't
day.
been paying attention lately. So yeah, it looks
Yeah.
like 2 to 250 depending on the model for the 470s. And then the 460s are about 120 to 150. So
Okay.
quite a range actually.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird. And then like the Radeons are going for like 280. I'm seeing up to around 300.
Wow. Still?
Yeah. So that's the problem is like for instance, let me see if I go back and like the 300. Okay, so I can get like on Amazon right now. I could get the MSI 480 Gaming X 8 gig model for $280. But then I could get where'd it go? The 470. Yeah, so the Sapphire Nitro Plus 470 8 gig is $250. So I mean, the Nitro Plus is supposed to be Sapphire's like high end with overclocked, and it's got the removable fan feature and stuff like that. But I mean, for $20 more, I can get a 480. Like, it makes no sense to get the 470, like, or that particular 470, because like the price gap between it and the next model up is so small. So I don't know, it's just weird. And then then Asus has the Strix 470, so it's still slightly overclocked. It's still a really good cooler, and that one's 200. So I mean, that makes sense. I mean, $70 gap, it makes sense, and it's still like a nice card. It's not like a cheap reference model or reference type model with like a loud blower fan. I mean, it's a Strix. So yeah, it's just weird because like at the lower end of the price point, the 470 makes a lot of sense, but like some of what they're charging for these high end models, it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense why they would do that when the 480s, when people are coming out with 480 models for not much more. So it's just, I don't know, it's weird.
Well, and it makes you wonder how many are actually selling, right?
Yeah.
You'd hope not many. You'd hope the market would punish it, but you know.
Well, it's part of it's just like, I don't know about the 400 series, but like the 10 or the 1000 series are terrible as far as availability. Because I talked about this in, the Show Your New Toys thread on the forum for people to just kind of show off what new stuff they bought. And I talked about it, but I've been on the search for a GTX 1060, but specifically the EVGA Superclock one, because EVGA has two models currently out for the 1060. They're both kind of short models using the reference PCB, and unlike what NVIDIA did with their reference models, is like they didn't just stick a fan off the end of it. So like it's just a single fan, and it's actually short. The problem is the non-SC model just has like an extruded chunk of aluminum for the heatsink, and that's it. Like, it's just a hunk of aluminum. The SC model for $10 more gets you proper heat pipes and fins. So it's a much, much better cooler. And I specifically wanted it, and we'll go into this why later. But it's been out of stock for like the last 2 or 3 weeks that I've ever looked for it on either Newegg or Amazon. Or no, it's been out of stock on Newegg, and then on Amazon, people are wanting like $350 for this stupid thing when it's only $260 normally. And then I think last week on Wednesday, I was just randomly spot checking, and then Amazon said in stock, I think it was that Friday. So I was looking at this last Wednesday, and then they said they would have it in stock Friday, so that was the 19th. And it's like, order now and we'll ship it and you should get it Monday. It's like, oh, sweet. And it was at like $260 because it was actually Amazon selling these, not third party. So they are actually selling it for MSRP. So ordered one up, got my order in. So I was happy. And then the next day, Thursday, I kind of just checked to see if they still had stock of it, just to see if they had ran out already. And they had ran out, which makes sense, right? So limited stock. But, so remember, the Amazon said that if I had ordered it before, like, so I ordered it Wednesday and then Wednesday, and they said they would probably ship by Monday. So I checked Thursday and Amazon's out. But I go and look at the third-party sellers, and what do you know? There's a ton of third-party sellers that have stock now that all want at least $300 for it, but they won't be able to ship until mid of the next week.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're just buying up stock, turning around, selling it before they've even received it, and just putting out ship dates like later than what they would have received it from Amazon. Like, just so annoying. But I mean,
wow.
I mean, the problem is like, what are you going to do about it? I mean, like, the only way to solve this is to have enough inventory that you can continue selling to MSRP and just like kill the profit for people doing that. So like, it's super frustrating, but it's the same thing with like ticket scalping. I mean, there's not really any good solution when you have a limited amount of inventory. Like, you just, how do you prevent people from buying it and then reselling it at a markup? You just really can't.
Yeah. Ay.
But,
well, if you complain about it on the internet loudly enough. No, I mean, it's only time is going to solve that problem. You just got to play the waiting game.
Yep. So if you're in a hurry and you want to spend the money, I guess knock yourself out. But yeah, it is frustrating though. But oh well. And
I'm sorry about that.
well, I got it though, so I'm happy. But I feel sorry for everybody who didn't manage to snag one when Amazon had them in stock, and now they got to pay the sharks. But, yeah.
All right. Well, that's enough of that depressing topic. I want to move on to something that's less depressing and more just kind of weird. I was really learning more about this just before the show, reading up the article that you wrote on it. It's a new CPU cooler by Cooler Master. First off, the name is just terrible. I mean, this is like, if I were 12 years old, I'd think it was pretty cool, but maybe not for me. The MasterLiquid Maker 92 is what it's called. And I'll put a link in the show notes. You really can't do much justice for it other than to take a look at the pictures. But basically, it's a CPU cooler where it's a AIO, except the whole AIO is one unit. It's not like you mount the radiator somewhere in the case and maybe like where a fan bay is or whatever. There's this whole system where you have the CPU block and whatnot, and that feeds into the pump and reservoir, which is integrated with the radiator, and all of that's on a stand that's on top of the CPU block, and then the stand itself pivots, so you could either have the CPU cooler sort of standing upright, the radiator's upright, or you can actually tilt it or cant it and have it sort of lay flat. And this in many ways would be similar to that weird CPU cooler that Corsair made, except instead of sort of ejecting the air from the side, it's still kind of it's like a fan blowing down, more traditional blower cooler. So it's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. It's interesting enough insofar that it's a form factor for this sort of thing that hasn't really been done before. But at the same time, I mean, it's a 92 mil fan, and my understanding is that any reviews and such we've seen so far aren't exactly terribly promising. Although you know a bit more about this, James.
Yeah. So I think what it is that as far as, well, let's just real quickly. The name is just utterly stupid.
It's the MasterLiquid Maker.
No, and the worst part is that, like, that's the name of the product, but then if you say the full name, like the company, it's the Cooler MasterLiquid Maker 92. Like, it's so stupid.
You're right. The
Yeah.
Cooler Master Liquid Maker
Yes.
92.
Like the way I wrote the title broke it up, but yeah, if you actually say it together, it sounds even more stupid than it already is. So just I want to get that out of the way because it's stupid. Anyway, so it is an interesting product as far as like it is something different for sure. It's I mean, the thing is, like like a lot of people, I think I saw comments on other sites when it first was announced, talking about how it's obviously going to perform poorly. But I mean, 92 millimeter all-in-ones I mean, they exist. I mean, they're not very common. I don't think anybody sells it. Like Corsair or Cooler Master, any of them sell one under their name. Asus makes one, and they do sell it on eBay for way too much money. But they're also really commonly used in OEM machines. So I know for sure HP uses it in kind of like their higher end, but not like the Envy series. Just kind of, well, actually, no, I think they do use it in Envy. And then I believe Dell uses it for some of the Alienwares. They use 92 millimeter because it lets them mount it on the rear exhaust point without having to make the case a lot wider.
Gotcha.
Because they typically prefer reference video cards. And most people don't realize this, but part of the reason they do that, they use reference cards rather than aftermarket cards, is because the reference NVIDIA cards have mounting points on the front of them to screw in brackets. So if you've ever looked at a reference NVIDIA video card from the last several years, several generations, there's like 3 or 4 screw holes on the front of the card, like the front edge of the card. And like they don't seem to serve any purpose because there's like nothing attached to them normally, like on retail cards. But like Dell and HP and stuff attach brackets. They screw brackets to those holes, and they use that to secure it to the chassis. And that's for shipping purposes, so they don't get damaged during shipping. But so anyway, so they use reference cards, so they don't have to make really wide cases because they don't have to account for like some of the stupidly tall aftermarket cards. So like if they bumped up to 120 millimeter cooler on the rear exhaust, they'd have to make the case a lot wider than they need to otherwise. So 92 millimeter all-in-ones are actually fairly commonly used in OEM machines, and so they don't. And I've tested one, and it doesn't have any problem like cooling like a decent processor, like a 65 watt or even 90 watt processor. Of course, you're not going to get the temps of 120 millimeter rad just because there isn't as much surface area, but you can get pretty good performance. The problem is that like on a normal water cooling setup is you'd have the radiator mounted somewhere that's more convenient to exhaust the heat than it would be if it was just like a heat sink. So you lose that advantage with this unit. Because like the radiator is going to be stuck to wherever the processor is. I mean, it's just attached to it. And then as far as performance goes with this unit in particular, I think the problem is that they overemphasize low noise, which it's good that they emphasized it because Corsair basically went the other extreme, and their take on a small form factor water cooler is absurdly loud. Yeah, I wish Jay was here because he's experienced it himself. I mean, I have too, but he actually tried using it in like his build, and it's just ridiculously loud. So yeah. Anyway, and so the performance I think suffers because the fan, they just run it at too low of an RPM, so it can't push enough air to really compensate for the fact that one, it's only a 92 millimeter rad, and then two, that it's not mounted where it can like cleanly exhaust straight out the case or clean the intake. So it's just kind of in the middle of the case because it's mounted to the motherboard itself. So performance isn't looking too good from the reviews I've seen. I'd be really curious though if somebody replaced the fan or like with something like more powerful, see if that kind of can compensate.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting cooler. The problem is like if you were only ever going to run it in vertical mode, there's better coolers. If you're only ever going to run it in horizontal mode, there's better coolers. So the only advantage is if you're ever going to switch between them, which I mentioned in the article. Like, I can see where somebody starts off with like an ITX rig and something like a PCIe Prodigy where there's lots and lots of room, and so they could run it in vertical mode, and then like they are planning to eventually downsize to like something like the NK-Sim 1, and so like this cooler will not fit in the NK-Sim 1 in vertical mode, so they would have to switch it to horizontal mode. So if you're kind of thinking ahead, it kind of makes sense. But, I don't know. Like, that, I mean, SFF cooling is a niche market, and then SFF cooling SFF water cooling is a niche within that, and then SFF water cooling where, like, you're thinking ahead, where you can currently run it in one mode and then later have to switch it to another. I mean, I just don't see this being, like, successful. At least from a financial standpoint. I mean,
yeah, I mean, you really have to try to come up with. I mean, as you were just doing.
Yeah, I mean,
you have to try to find
there are use cases,
ways in
but
which it's
they're
useful.
very, very, very like niche. So, yeah.
I mean, if you're struggling to come up with an example of like, yeah, like people in these particular circumstances they want it, well, then there are probably not that many people. I'm curious as to who they think they're trying to address with this. Like,
I don't know, because they don't really make cases that would really use this. Because they make several SFF cases, like the Elite 100 series, like the Elite. I think it's the 110, 120, and 130, I think. But all three of those put the power supply over the motherboard, so this wouldn't fit in it in either mode. So I don't know. It's an oddball for sure. I mean, I will say though, props to Cooler Master for trying something different. I mean, it is cool to see like some kind of innovation, because like really it's been so stagnant for water cooling, because I mean there's really not much you can do. Though I'm kind of suspicious that half the point of this wasn't so much to innovate as it was to get around Asetek's patents. Because Asetek's patent covers the pump being part of the block, so the pump's part of the upper like rad thing that pivots, so it's not part of the block, so it's not covered.
Sure.
So I don't know. I think this was just kind of an attempt to wrap that up in a more interesting package. But
yeah,
whatever.
And I mean, I'm always pro experimenting in terms of the form factor. Like, I think it's an interesting idea. I just don't think that. I don't think that this was created with a particular problem in mind that the market was really in need of solving. I mean, it's curious, and there'll be some very, very, very specific use cases where people might find it useful, but. So I guess we'll leave that as it is. And the last bit of news I wanted to talk about was actually something we had to edit after the fact, because it seemed that our primary source for it was a little bit misinformed. And this, of course, has to do with the PCIe 4.0 specification, which naturally we're all looking forward to. And there had been what seemed to be some developments in terms of what you could expect for power delivery through the slot, but it turns out that that was incorrect. And once again, James, I'll let you elaborate, because it's a bit of an interesting story.
Yeah, so I guess first off though, PCIe 4.0, so they're currently, like, there's a group called the PCI SIG. I forget what that stands for, but they're the group responsible for kind of like coming up with and maintaining the standard for PCI Express. And so 4.0 has been in the works for some time now, and they're expecting to finalize it like late this year, and then we'll start seeing products for it hopefully next year or sometime, like just like the very earliest of products. But it doubles the bandwidth from 3.0. So that's cool, though. Like, video cards today with PCI Express 3.0 X16 haven't really saturated the 3.0. Like lots of people have done tests on it, like running cards at like 3.0x16, 2.0x16, and even like 1.1x16, and then also like other variants like X8 and X4 and stuff like that. And it doesn't really make that much of a difference for the most part. But I mean, faster is better, so at least for future proofing. Though for video cards, it's not really that exciting in the near term, but it is really exciting for storage, as odd as that seems. That we want more bandwidth for storage instead of video cards, but the problem is most like PCI Express SSDs are only running at X4, and we're already hitting that limit actually. Like the very newest Samsung M.2 drives, like the SM961, that does 3,200 megabytes per second sequential reads. So it's already hitting the limit of PCIe 3.0 X4. And the problem with M.2 is just it's a physically smaller connector. So like making an X8 M.2 isn't really possible just because there isn't room for the contacts. So having double the bandwidth and like on X4 would be really useful for M.2 drives. And then also like for like adding cards, even though they don't necessarily have the limitation of or of the slots like M.2 does, it'd still be nice to be able to run them at X8 instead of having to go up to X16 or something like that, because then there's more slots in your motherboard typically that can run at X8 rather than X16, especially on the mainstream socket where you're kind of limited in PCIe lanes. So that's really cool. But the biggest thing is like Tom's Hardware was the one who had this article originally, and because they were talking with one of the guys from PCI SIG. And I guess there was like some either miscommunication or misunderstanding there, and they took it to, I mean, because the representative had said that the new PCIe 4 standard would have 300 watts off the slot. And I guess what added to this misunderstanding was that AMD has been showing kind of development boards for their new Zen processors and the new AM4 socket, and there's like a lot of extra power connectors on the motherboard on those prototypes. So Tom's Hardware kind of put two and two together. It's like, like we're getting 300 watts from the slot. It's coming from all these extra power connectors on the motherboard. It makes sense. And the big advantage of that, of course, would be for SFF is now you don't have to have power connectors on the video card, because that's one of, like, for SFF cases, that's always one of the biggest frustrations is that, like, video cards there's standards for, like, the height and the width and the length, but, like, really the only one that manufacturers ever adhere to is, like, the, it's kind of confusing because, like, different people use different terms, but the thickness of the card, like, whether it's a single slot or dual slot, that's usually pretty standardized. The length of the cards vary all over the place, but really for SFF cases, the worst part is like the height, or some people would say the width of the card. Because like there's lots of low profile cooling solutions available, so you can get pretty short on the CPU cooling. But like if the video card like sticks up a lot, then you're kind of limited in how like the maximum like width of the case. And the problem is that it's not like you can just use one that's like shorter. Like if you want, like let's say a short GTX 1070, there's literally only one option right now. It's the Gigabyte one. And the power connectors on it, luckily they're recessed a bit, but they do still like stick up rather than being on the front edge of the card. So you still have to like account for that, like with a case, the SFF case design, which is frustrating. So if we could like get away from that, and even though you'd still have, like, to be clear, some people kind of misunderstood this, like readers that I saw on the internet, is that you would still have power connectors. Like you can't just magically generate 300 watts out of nowhere. Like the motherboard's going to need connectors for that 300 watts to come from. So like you still have your PCIe power connectors off your power supply. You would just, in theory, like if this had turned out to be true, you would plug it into your motherboard instead of your video card, which for most users doesn't really make much of a difference. You're still plugging it in, just you where you plug it in is different. But for
Right, you're relocating the plugs.
yeah, you just relocating them. Yeah. For SFF though, that would have been nice because that way the video card makers we wouldn't be at the whims of where they decided to put the power connectors. Like it would be on the motherboard, so it'd be much lower height, and then the video cards would just be like the only thing you would have to account for is just however big the card is, rather than leaving enough room for the power connector to fit and like for the wires to bend over. So that would have been nice. Turns out it wasn't the case. So PCI SIG got back with Tom's Hardware and clarified, and it is 300 watts, but it's for all inclusive. So it's still 75 watts from the slot and then 225 watts from the power connectors. So basically it's just the same as 3.0. I think what may have caused the confusion is that there is, I think, some speculation that they may increase the power limit, because what happens is I think the Radeon 295X2 is kind of the most notable example, is that it actually does not meet the PCIe or the PCI SIG spec because it has 2 8-pin connectors, which 8-pin connectors are rated for 150 watts each. So that's 300 watts, but then you still have the slot for 75. So that's 375, like theoretically a total power it could draw, which exceeds the 300 watt maximum set by PCIe 3.0. So I think there's been kind of talk over the last couple of years that 4.0 would kind of formalize that, incorporate that into the standards. So then that way you could have, I guess, a maximum of 375 or maybe even more. So I think that's where the confusion came from. Maybe it's because like the original article said 300, but possibly up to 400 or 500. So it turned out though that it wasn't all from the slot. It'd be 75 from the slot as normal, and then the rest of it would be with just either more power connectors or whatever. So disappointing. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, although at the same time, like the transition to such a model also probably would have been a little bit messy. I mean, I guess it could have just been that a card could accept power either way, but like that was kind of the lingering question I had in the back of my head, was like, well, how do you like, okay, there's this new standard and lots of motherboards have it, and NVIDIA makes a new card, but it needs to work on old boards as well as new boards, so they can't make a card that can only accept, 250 watt card that can only accept power through the slot. So it also has to accept power through the connectors. I mean, how does that work? I'm not sure.
Oh, I know. The transition would have been a pain, which it's still going to be a pain, because I believe, I think what it is that 3.0 cards will work in 4.0 slots. Like the slots are backwards compatible, but 4.0 cards I do not believe will work in 3.0 slots. So there's going to be a transition where we'll have motherboards with 4.0 slots on them, probably just like one slot, just a single 4.0 slots, and then the rest are 3.0 or 2.0 or whatever. And then, so then that way you could buy a motherboard, be ready for the future, and then use your current video cards that are available. But then eventually we'll get to the point where once 4.0 cards come out, then you'll have to use them with new motherboards that have 4.0 slots. So it'll be a messy transition. I mean, kind of like 3.0 to 2.0, I guess. But well, no, actually, because when 3.0, you can use 3.0 cards in 2.0 slots.
Cards in 2.0 slots, yeah.
So it'll actually, you're right. It'll be a messier transition than it was then. So I don't know. We'll see, but.
Yeah, and that's not helped by the fact that my suspicion is that people hold on to motherboards for longer than they used to because they tend to stick with their processors.
Yeah, because the processors are so boring to talk about lately. Like the last several years, Zen's really our last hope. If Zen's not good, I don't know what we're gonna do because it's just so boring. All the interesting stuff basically happens on motherboards now. As depressing as that is, Intel has got. Kaby Lake is the next one, and it's going to implement the Optane, their 3D X point technology.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately you will have to get new motherboards to use that. so that sucks. But like really, that's like, to me, that's the most exciting thing about Kaby Lake, because like the CPU performance is going to be the same, like 5, maybe 10% improvement, like whatever.
Yeah.
So like the only reason I'm excited about the new Intel is because of the motherboards, not the CPUs. So
Yep, I agree.
that's kind of sad. So yeah.
We're only talking about depressing news stories.
Yeah.
We've terrible taste. But in any case, let's move on past the news, past the depressing stuff, and on to. Actually, this is going to again come from your side of things. It is for this episode. This freaking fantastic, functional, fully flavorful, fabulous favorite forum thread of the Fortuitous Fortnight. Authored by you. The STX 160, the most powerful ATX unit in the world. I don't want to spoil anything. I would encourage any and all listeners to not just hear about James talking about it, to actually read through this thing, because it is awesome and entertaining, and I really want this to be a thing. But please, James, if you could elaborate.
Yeah, so it's the actually it's the STX 160.0, which is important.
Oh,
the reason
reason
is that, so we'll get into like the specifics, but it's a 160 watt unit. But what I'm planning to do eventually is that I'm gonna get like fake stickers, and I'm gonna put STX 160.0, but put a really, really tiny decimal. Because it'll look like it's a 1600 watt
1600 watt
ATX unit. Because that would be, I think, one of the most powerful ATX units. Because most of them are only 1500.
Only 1500 watts
for the highest end. So, but anyway, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, ATX power supplies are stupidly big for modern computers because, like, the thing is that components have gotten more efficient. So, like, kind of like we were saying earlier, I mean, the 1060, 1070, 1080 is almost twice as efficient as, like, the 480, 470, 460. But the 480, 470, 460 are all still pretty efficient cards. Like all of them draw less than 250 watts. For the video card. And then processors, I mean, AMD has some catching up to do, like, compared to, like, with the FX series. But I mean, of course, it's all kind of, like, early hype and stuff. But, I mean, from what they've said, Zen's looking very promising from the efficiency standpoint. And then, of course, Intel has been making a big push for efficiency for quite a while now. So, I mean, ignoring kind of like the high-end desktop, like the 6 cores and stuff like that from Intel, I mean, almost all their mainstream processors are 90 watts or 60 watts or less. So, like, almost any single GPU with a single processor today generally will be well under 600 watts total power draw. So, having, like, the existence of all these 800 1,000 watt, 1,200 watt power supplies is kind of silly. People buy them just because either they don't know better or they just have this idea that one day they'll get like dual or triple GPUs. So like really for the vast majority of people, like you don't need more than 600 watt power supply. You really just don't. Like most people just will never use that much. And especially SFF, because I mean, like if you have a mini ITX system, I mean, you can only have a single video card in it, obviously. Well, actually, there's funny stuff you can do with PCIe bifurcation, but we won't get into that. And so we'll just say, for simplicity, single GPU, or single video card, I should say. And then most of the time you're limited to like 90 watt processors because you can't get FX processors from AMD and a mini ITX board. They don't make any.
For good reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could do 140 watt TDP processors from Intel with the AceRock ITX board or boards. There's the other like industrial one, but most people don't use it. So you could do like one of the high-end Intel chips on mini ITX, but those are pretty rare. So for the most part, you're looking at 90 watt TDP or less CPU and then like a single video card. So there's really no reason for most SFF systems to have anything over 600 watt. So like it's really frustrating to see all these like SFF or supposedly SFF cases that have all the support for like big ATX power supplies. They're just way oversized. I mean, there's not really any reason other than just like the availability and price of ATX, just because it's a more common form factor. Other than that, which I mean, it is an important consideration, but as far as like volume constraints and stuff, it just makes much more sense to do SFX or SFXL or like one of the other ones like Flex ATX or TFX, or there's like lots of cool standards to choose from to save space. So anyway, like for a while now, I've always been like thinking that ATX is stupidly big, and when the mini STX motherboards were kind of shown off at CES this year, I was thinking, they're 140 millimeters by 147 millimeters on the STX boards, and ATX power supplies are 150 millimeters wide by, in theory, they're supposed to be 140 millimeters deep, but like nobody ever does that, and they're almost all 160 to 180. So I was like, I could fit a mini STX motherboard inside an ATX power supply and fit the power supply in there too to power it. So I could have a power supply with a power supply and a motherboard and RAM and storage and CPU and have a fully functional computer in an ATX power supply. It's like, that would be awesome. So I kind of thought about it, but then it's like these boards were announced at CES, but then like they vanished and like there was no talk of them again until Computex, where they showed up, and then once again like nobody knows when they'd be available or what the price would be or anything. So I kind of just set the idea aside and forgot about it. But then two things happened. First, the GTX 1060 launched, which is why I mentioned earlier I've been kind of keeping an eye out for them. And they give the GTX 1060 basically delivers GTX 980 levels of performance and 120 watt power draw. So huge improvement. GTX 980 does about 225 watts or so.
It's nearly half the power consumption.
Yeah, so it's nearly like almost half the power consumption for the same levels of performance. Like, it's amazing. And then the second thing that happened was that the AceRock Mini STX board, well, not the board itself was announced, and then when I was digging into it for that, I realized that the Desk Mini 110 is it's a bare bones system, and it uses the same board. It's just all it is the board and then a little STX chassis and then an AC adapter. And it suddenly went on sale. Like it was on Newegg and I bought one. And so like I was just crunching the numbers, and it's like HD Plex makes a 160 watt AC/DC internal adapter. Because like that's one thing is like I mean people do cool stuff with it, like the NFC S4 Mini, the case, not the phone. It's a really cool case, uses external bricks to be able to get like a really slim form factor. I mean, nothing against them. There's people doing cool stuff with them. Personally, I do not like external bricks. I don't. I would much rather have a self-contained computer without having to lug around extra stuff. So like that. So yeah, I much prefer internal adapters. So yeah, that's 160 watts. And so the video card's 120, so that leaves 40 watts left over for everything else. So, But then I was looking, and Intel makes low power processors, the T series usually, though there's a couple of other weird letters that sometimes get thrown in there. But normally it's the T series. And so I found on eBay a 6700T. So this is an i7, and actually real quick, on the desktops it's not terrible, but on mobile Intel CPUs, like if it says i5 or i7, that almost means nothing. It's so stupid, like, because the U series, like the ultra low power ones, if it says i7, but then it's like whatever the model number is, and then a U, it's usually a dual core. It's not even a quad core. Like it's not even like a non-hyper-threading quad. It's actually a hyper-threading dual half the time. So super frustrating. But that's how they're able to keep the power levels that low. And so then the naming is just stupid.
Yeah.
Like they shouldn't call them i7s, but whatever. So anyway, 6700T, it is an actual i7. It is a hyper-threading quad core. The main thing is that it's a 35 watt TDP, which they mostly achieve by running it at lower clocks compared to like a normal 6700 or even like a 6700K.
Right.
But it is a true i7. None of this weird nonsense that goes on with the mobile chips. So found one on eBay for $260, which is amazing because like you only see these processors in like OEM machines, like either
aren't they really expensive usually?
yeah, they're because you only see them in thin, like really thin, high performance all-in-ones or like micro towers, like for businesses. So you can't buy them at retail, like you can't buy it at Newegg or Amazon or something like that. So usually the only times you ever see them for sale is when somebody's pulled it from one of these systems, which it's a Skylake processor. I mean, Skylake's only been out a year, so there's not a whole lot of dead Skylake systems in general, and then especially like dead like of these like the 6700T models, which are pretty rare to begin with. So like that was amazing. Like the $260, less than like it was awesome. So I bought that one. Yeah, turned out it was too good to be true. It had problems. So it was such a mess troubleshooting this thing because like basically I popped it into the Ace Rock system, the Desk Mini 110. And then I bought some ballistics, bought some Crucial Ballistics DDR4 SODIMM because it had like these cool heat spreaders on it, or at least it had pictures of what looked like heat spreaders on it.
I saw this.
Yes. So I get them, not really having paid attention. It's because I've seen like actually I have a set of Crucial Ballistics DDR4, but like dim, like normal size, like desktop, and that's what I have in my workstation. So I mean, they look nice. Like, I mean, heat spreaders aren't really necessary on DDR4. It's efficient enough as it is, but it looks nice. Black PCB, gray metal heat spreader. It looks nice. And I've seen the DDR3 versions that do have heat spreaders on them. So like, I mean, I've seen them for DDR3, so I didn't really think anything of it. Like, oh, it's a DDR4 version, heat spreader, SODIMM, whatever. Easy buy, cheap enough. So I get it, and I unbox it. They're stickers. They're stickers that look like heat spreaders.
Literally stickers.
Yes, literally stickers. Like, oh, I was so upset. I mean, not that I need heat spreaders, because, like, they don't need it. DDR4 does not need heat spreaders. It's just, it does not run that hot. Like, DDR3 doesn't run that hot either. Really, it's a leftover from the DDR2 days. But the picture looks like it, and the way the lighting is done on all the product shots, where it's kind of at an angle to kind of give it, kind of make it pop. Oh, it's
depth.
Depth. Gives a little bit of depth. Oh, that's so annoying. And because like, so it's really what they do on the product page is they don't say that it has a heat spreader. Like, there's no mention that it, like, there's nothing that says, like, comes with heat spreader, obviously. But they don't say it doesn't have one either. Like, it's so annoying. It's just one of those things, like, they get away with it by just, like, like George says in the chat, like, implication. Like, you kind of just, like, you see a picture of, I mean, if you ever look at a picture of this thing, I mean, it really looks like a heat spreader just at first glance. Like, you really can't tell that it's flat. Just from the picture alone without like really looking at it. So like you just kind of make the assumption and then you get it, and then like you can't really say it because like technically they don't say that it has a heat spreader, but they don't say it doesn't either.
They just know that like for 10% of people it might make the difference because they'll be like, ooh.
Yeah, and I mean, and like some of the marketing on their website though really pushes the boundaries. Like I think one sentence I'm just going off memory says is like, Crucial ballistics, DDR4 SODIMM, blah, blah, blah. The design keeps your memory cool, or your system cool and collected. Yeah.
Stickers do not.
Well,
stickers, if anything, they're insulating.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's like cool and collected. So they're going for the other definition of cool, not like temperature cool. So it's like one of those things. Like, somebody in marketing is getting paid lots of money to do this. It's frustrating. I mean,
that's pretty obnoxious. And that's really pretty obnoxious.
It is. It's just bad marketing, really, at its finest. But what really is, like, to add like just injury to insult, the RAM was bad. Like, it threw memories in memtest. Like what happened, because like I mean, I'm trying to review this Desk Mini, which it's coming, guys, eventually. I got distracted by this project, so yeah. But I was running like Prime, just kind of stress the system and kind of get a rough idea of like power consumption numbers and stuff like that, and then like it blue screened. It's like, well, that's weird. So I do some stuff, and it just like it keeps blue screening and crashing and locking up, and it's like, wow, this is crazy. It's a brand new system. So the problem is it's a brand new system though. So like it's a brand new motherboard, it's a brand new AC adapter.
Right, you have to test everything.
Yeah, it's brand new RAM, brand new CPU. Well, new to me CPU. So I had no idea what was the culprit. I mean, the thing is though, like blue screens, random crashing, it's probably RAM. And actually, weirdly, at work, we've been running into a lot of bad RAM lately, so that had me suspicious. So, run memtest, like, after, let's see, or no, I start running Prime, and yeah, Prime just constantly throws errors when it wasn't blue screening, like Windows wasn't crashing. So I run memtest throws a bunch of errors, or it does after a while, which made it even harder to troubleshoot. Because it would run for like an hour or two and then just throw a ton of errors. So it made it difficult. So eventually I narrow it down, because in order to kind of like limit possibilities, I kind of took it all apart, put one stick in, put a different processor in it and all that stuff, just kind of to narrow down the possibilities. And so eventually, after like 2 or 3 days, because like I said, the mem test had to run for a while for it to throw the error, I narrowed it down to one of the sticks was bad. Okay, so it's annoying, especially because they're not really heat spreaders, but whatever, it happens. So set it aside, start working with the CPU, and so I had taken the CPU and put it in another system. Because the thing is like on modern processors, the memory controller is on the CPU itself. There's not really a North bridge anymore. So like there is a possibility, because what I was worried about is if the bad RAM had damaged the CPU. But no, it turns out the CPU was just bad too. And actually, I'm kind of wondering if maybe the CPU had damaged the RAM, because it just threw all sorts of weird errors. And I tried like 2 different, because I put it in I think an ATX board, so I could use like just normal DIMMs, because I didn't have any other DDR4 SODIMMs laying around.
Yeah.
And I used the memory I had in my workstation, which I've had for like 2 years, so I know they're completely stable. And yeah, it still threw errors, so yeah. So it turns out the CPU was bad too.
Oh, God.
And
you went through the ringer.
Yeah, and which I was kind of suspicious, because like, why would somebody? Because like I said, Skylake hasn't been out that long, so I mean, and the seller on eBay was a recycler, like electronics recycler. So that meant that somebody had scrapped or thrown away or brought in for recycling a computer, and a high-end computer, because it has an i7, even if it's a T-series. They brought in this computer that's less than a year old, so that's kind of suspicious. But I mean, it was 260, and like everybody else was selling them for like 360s. So it was like, I just whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of suspicious now that what happened is that kind of what I suspect is that like some IT or some company bought a bunch of like micro towers or whatever that had these processors in, and then this like one machine was just constantly acting up, like throwing random errors, locking up, crashing, whatever. And like CPUs, like modern, especially Intel CPUs, rarely fail. Like it is super rare that an Intel processor fails. Yep. So like my guess is IT probably didn't suspect it, and they probably tested it, tried different AC adapter or power supply or whatever it came with that particular system, tried different RAM, tried reinstalling Windows, and they probably couldn't get it to be stable, so they just gave up and just chunked it. And then this recycling company pulls a processor because they rarely fail, right? And they probably just popped it in a system, it booted up, it looked good, they turned around, sold it on eBay, and then I bought it, and then turns out it was bad. So that's probably why this machine was scrapped, was probably because the processor was bad and causing it to crash randomly. But anyway, so turns out the RAM was bad, CPU was bad. Luckily, I was able to get a refund on the CPU, which is really good. Really lucky because a lot of, like, if you buy a CPU from Newegg will tell you to just, like, if it's bad or you want to return it, they'll just say no. Like, their policy is CPUs are not eligible for refunds or returns.
Oh, seriously?
Because the problem is like it would be really easy for somebody to mishandle it and damage it. And the other thing is it's really hard to test them. Like I found out. Like, it wouldn't throw memories for, like, several hours into the run. So, yeah, they don't take returns on them because it's just, there's a lot of potential for either fraud or just, like, idiots who don't know what they're doing damaging it. And then, like, it's hard to test if it's good or not. So you can't just, like, resell it as open box. So
I have a story about that. A quick aside. When I went to college, I had a really nice desktop build and tri-monitor setup. It was two GTX 280s and all this, but I took the desktop apart and I sold all the parts individually on Craigslist to buy a Retina MacBook Pro, which is what I have now. And, you know, like the SSDs I sold separately, the hard drives I sold separately, some of the accessories I sold separately, the enclosure, which was a Antec P180, I sold separately in the power supply. But everything else, the RAM and motherboard and CPU cooler, you know, that went to one kid who seemed to be like this. It was like him and a friend. We met at some parking lot somewhere. You know, he gave me the money. I gave him the stuff. Let him know if he had any problems. You know, like, here's a Google Voice number you can text me with. Obviously, I didn't give him my actual phone number. And like a week later, he's texting me saying, "Hey man, I'm having trouble. Whenever I try and turn on the computer, it just shuts off like immediately." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." So I try and help him, like, over text, and clearly the BIOS is posting, right? So the computer starts up and it's acting normal, and then like 3 or 4 seconds into it, it just shuts off, right? I'm like, "Oh, that's weird behavior," but I mean, I tested everything and I know it's all working, and obviously I want it to work for him. And so I was thinking through of, like, all the questions I could ask, because it couldn't be something like, you know, it's not plugged in or whatever. And I was like, okay, well, are you using the CPU cooler that you bought from me? Because it was a you know, like a all-in-one. Because you know, AIOs were just coming into form. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, did you plug it in to make sure that, you know, like the pump and the fan is powered and whatnot? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, what thermal paste did you use? What's thermal paste? You know what you put on the CPU and then you put the cooler on. He was like, well, I just attached the cooler to the CPU, and it took all of my restraint to, like, text him back and be like, you need thermal paste. And I gave him a link to, like, Arctic Silver 5 on Newegg, and I never heard from him again. I was just like, wow. I mean, he knew enough to get to that point, but...
Well, yeah, it's just... Well, I guess it's, like, a lot of times it's, like, pre-applied, like, on new coolers. So I wonder if like
Yeah.
his friend has probably, I run into this all the time at work, is like the friend has built one, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're really an expert. So my guess is friend has built one, but only using new coolers that had it pre-applied, so it never became a problem. So then they buy it from you and it's used, so it doesn't have it and doesn't have the thermal paste pre-applied.
And they're
And they
probably
probably
just like,
just
oh, well, maybe this one doesn't need
yeah,
it.
they probably slapped it together and no, what do you know, it doesn't work.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'll always remember that. I was just like, ooh, ooh.
Yeah.
Ugh. But anyway,
anyway, so
what's the progress like right now? Like, what are next steps for you to keep working on this project?
yeah, so yeah, I ended up getting a 6400T instead of the 6700T because it was cheaper. 'Cause that's the thing, is like the reason I got this one off eBay, even though it was from a recycler, which was kind of odd, is because everybody else wants like $360 for these processors, which, I mean, supply and demand and all that. But for $360, I could buy an Intel 6-core. I mean, like the 6800K. So it's hard to justify. 6400T, not nearly as impressive. It's only an i5, though it is a real i5. It is a quad core, not a hyper-threading dual. But it was $150 or something like that. So I was like, whatever. I'll just cut my losses. I was able to get a refund on this one, so that's good. And then got the 6400T, got a set of Kingston RAM, which does not throw errors in mem test, by the way. Yeah, so Kingston, if you're listening,
That's nice.
yeah, good job on the RAM. I'd like some more. Anyway, so yeah, I got that sorted out. And then basically, oh yeah, so kind of coming back is, so the original idea, like at the beginning of this, was that I would fit a working computer in an ATX housing. So pretty cool. But then like the GTX 1060 does 120 watts. I now have a 35 watt processor. Took a while to get there, but I got one. So in theory, I can run both a video card and this i5, like a real i5, off the HD Plex 160 watt internal AC adapter. So I could fit up both, not only a system, which is still impressive in an ATX computer or housing, but I could fit a gaming computer, and not just like a 750 or GTX 750 gaming computer. Like I could have a GTX 1060 in this thing, like 980 levels of performance in an ATX power supply. So of course, like to be able to fit this, I had to, like, as some of you may be aware, Mini STX does not have a PCIe slot. So luckily there are like M.2, or luckily that's kind of the other thing, is this particular board, the AceRock here, the M.2 is wired to the CPU rather than being wired to the chipset, because it's an H110 chipset. H110 chipsets can only run M.2 slots at 2.0 X4, I believe. So it's X4, but it's only 2.0, which kind of we mentioned earlier when we were talking about PCIe 4.0. It doesn't make a huge difference, but I mean, definitely at X16, like 2.0 X16 to 3.0 X16 for like especially 1080p, almost no difference. You almost can't measure the difference. X4, it's maybe starting to get noticeable. So I really like that the AceRock board here had 3.0 X4, and it was also wired to the CPU directly. So a company called B Plus makes all sorts of cool little adapters. And they make one that's a M.2 to slot adapter. So there's like a PCIe X4 slot on like what would be like a little piece, or yeah, it's a slot, PCIe X4 slot on a PCB that's the size of an M.2 card. And it's really cool because it's open-ended. So you can stick a X16 whatever in it, even though it's only actually X4. Like you don't, I mean, you could do that. Otherwise, you just would have to cut it. But this one's already open-ended, so it saves me that step. I don't have to like risk damaging it or whatever. And it's also got a 4-pin floppy power connector, because M.2 obviously can't provide enough power to run like a video card. That would be bad, like 75 watts. That wouldn't end well. But they thought of that, and so it has like a power, and what it does is, so it just transfers the signal. And so like like the whole like 75 watts of power off the slot, like we were talking about earlier. On this adapter, you get it from the 4-pin floppy power connector, and it comes with like the floppy to Molex cable, whatever. So that takes care of that. That gets me a slot, and then the HD Plex makes a really, really flexible PCIe X16 extender. It's really thin, really flexible, so that way I'd be able to kind of squish it into this build. And like I said, the M.2 adapter is open-ended, so even though it's an X16 extender, it wouldn't be a problem. So kind of had all my parts together, and I've tested it, and that does work. Or at least I've tested it with the 980. I haven't tested it with the 1060 yet, but it all works in theory. And so basically at that point, it was kind of like getting the housing together. And originally I was going to try to fit it in an actual ATX power supply, just kind of have a whole sleeper rig type of thing. But the problem is like I kind of go through this in the build log, is after mocking it up in SketchUp, is it turned out I would really, to safely fit everything, I would really need a 230 millimeter deep power supply, which are really, really, really rare. Like they do exist, but most ATX, like most of the really high-end ATX power supplies are 220 millimeter or 200 millimeter. So the problem is like looking on eBay, like for some reason people think because it's like a 12 or 14 or 1600 watt power or 1500 watt power supply, even if it's dead, it's still worth a lot of money. So like I saw one that was like a 1300 watt, and they still wanted $80 for it, and then the fan didn't work. So, I mean, I could have, maybe if I looked long enough, I could have found one for a decent price that was big enough. But I mean, the problem is like, even if I tracked one down, I would still have to make a lot of modifications to it. And I kind of wanted to get this whole project kind of wrapped up fairly quickly so I can kind of move on. I just want to do this just to prove a point. So I didn't want to spend a ton of time, like waiting for one to come on sale and modifying it. So I was like, screw it. I'll just design my own. The other thing is like, if I could like just push pixels on the computer and let somebody else actually do all the hard work, then I'm all for that. So yeah, I was like, whatever, I'll just design one. So I was like, the original intention was just be like, I would show like, oh, here's how I designed it, and here's like some of the kind of things you had to be aware of that maybe aren't obvious to somebody who's designing a case for the first time, like some of the details that can get you. So that was the idea. The problem is that I like to explain things, and I would be like, oh yeah, like you can't do this bend, and I was going to explain why you can't, or like why I made the bend in the model this certain way, but it's like, well, to understand why though, you have to kind of understand how press brakes work. So like 3,000 words later, I've now explained how press brakes work. So now you understand why I did this in the case. It's like, oops, didn't really mean to do that. There's like, well, okay, whatever. That press brakes, they're pretty important to sheet metal case design. So yeah, but then it's like, well, I mean, bending it, yeah, but you also like the reason like I did this other thing was because the sheet was like of a certain thickness, and so now you have to kind of understand like what sheet thickness, like what's the deal there, because like there's this whole weird gauge system for steel and like just weird stuff. So I was like, well, I had to explain that too now. And then it's like, well, I also need to explain like why when I did the vents I did it this way. To understand that, you had to understand how laser cutters work, and like, well, if you're gonna talk about laser cutters, you should talk about like the other options to cut sheet metal. So yeah, it's just kind of spiraled out of control, and I think I'm at like 12,000 words and counting so far for this build log. So it's gotten a bit out of hand. But I mean, the thing is like I've wanted to write like a how to design a case for a while, and it's just like, I mean, I like explaining things, but I don't necessarily like writing, which seems kind of odd, but like I don't really like to write for writing's sake. So I could
Sure, I know exactly what you
so
mean.
I could just never really bring myself to actually just sit down and just write this out, like how to design a case. But like now I had a good excuse because I wanted to show off what I'm doing, like my work on this build log. And then like this, I was able to kind of like harness my desire to explain things to actually just push out like a bunch of words and get it written out. Um, and but yeah, even starting, like I knew going into this that I wanted to kind of explain things, but I had no idea. Like I'm 12,000 words in, and I still got so much to talk about. There's so much more explaining to do. It's like it's getting crazy. The problem is though, is like I'm catching up. I had intended to be like have everything written up by the time I received the prototype, but because I had posted a picture, like kind of the first picture of the actual unit. They're pressing in some of the hardware into it, and so I probably will receive it sometime next week. And I still got a lot to talk about, so I have a busy weekend ahead of me because I need to write up as much as I can to catch up, and then I got other projects that are of interest to the community that are working on that involve cases.
Yes.
And then also I'm still working on the review for the ASRock Desk Mini and the Asus Z170i Pro Gaming and the GTX 1060. And I still want to do like a comparison of like the 6700T, and then like we had a 6700 at work I was going to borrow to compare like performance and power consumption, but we sold that, so I'll have to use the 6700K and downclock it. But I want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'll probably only get a few of those things done, but I need to get at least something. So yeah, it'll be a busy weekend, but yeah, this build log though is it's been really I don't know. It's just something I've wanted to do for a while, and so it's just been really satisfying to actually get it written out. Yeah.
I cannot wait for all of this. I'm really
I
excited.
know
I
the
think
end product.
It's such a neat project.
What's even better though is I haven't talked about it too much in the build log itself, but I think I talked about it on the chat here for the recording about what my kind of second act for this, which. I'll go ahead and talk about it since no, I don't think that many people listen to this podcast. Just being honest. Just being honest.
Hey, I mean, hey, relative to the forum traffic, sure.
Yeah.
But, like,
so I'll go ahead and talk about it. We'll see if anybody actually mentions it.
Leaks
yeah.
it.
Yeah. So kind of a test. But basically, I had a customer at work with he's bought several computers from us. He does a lot of graphics design, so he wants high-end machines, and he has a justification for it. But he always wants them like really big, flashy cases. I don't know if anybody ever remembers these, but Cooler Master made these special edition. I forget the model. It was like the Stacker series. I forget the model of the case, but it's like whatever Stacker. And they had a
Stacker 830.
I think so. And they had them like a special editions that were airbrushed, like legit, like nicely painted, airbrushed, clear coat, really, really nice cases. So anyway, he has one of those from us, and then like a couple other cases. Like he's got two Alienwares. One's an actual Alienware, like the new triangular one, and then an older one that's an older Aurora that it's actually just the case, and we redid the guts. So he's got a
sort of the rounded tower.
Yeah, with like the movable fins on top.
Yep.
So he's got a bunch of he's got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 machines like this that are in these humongous cases.
Yikes.
Yeah. So one of them is in the original Cooler Master Cosmos, which I'm not a huge fan of the original one because the internal layout's not really that good, but he's got one. And one of the weird things with the original Cosmos, I think they did away with this on the second one, but I'm not sure, is the power button is not like a normal like button, like clicky button type of thing. It's like a capacitive touch button thing to turn it on and off. It's really weird. And it actually, like, the case comes with like a little 24-pin adapter to kind of like siphon off 5-volt standby to power it. So it's just a weird setup overall. And the problem he was having was that it was getting stuck. Like, it would just randomly trigger, since it's not an actual switch. It's like a capacitive touch thing. And so what would happen is it'd be working along and it would just shut off, because it's like the power. It'd be like if you press, like, just held down the power button, it would just trigger. So I mean, that's annoying enough in general, but I mean, they're trying to get work done on this thing and it would just shut off randomly. So that's obviously no good.
Yeah.
The other weird thing is that it would turn, or when you tried to turn it off, it would get stuck. So like it would turn on, and then it'd be like if you held the power button, it would turn off. But then like the power button's still held, so it would turn on. But then like the power button's held, so it would turn off. So it would get stuck in a loop until you just like pulled the power cord. So like not only would it shut off randomly, you couldn't get it to stay off when you wanted to turn it off. So like it's just like, obviously this is just like super frustrating for them, because like this is a company, they're trying to get stuff done. Trying to do business. So they bring it in, we check it. I finally figure out that's what it was. Like the weird capacitive touch button nonsense is messing up. And the problem is like there wasn't really any easy way to fix it. Because like I can't get those parts. Because like they quit making this case quite some time ago. It's like the only case that uses this type of setup that I've ever seen. So like there wasn't any easy way to fix it. I'll just hold. I meant to like put all the phones and just put them in the furthest corner of the store, and I forgot.
You can answer that if you need to.
I never answer it before we open. Yeah. Like, that just encourages them to call more. It's like, we open at 10, and you can come in at 10. Like, I don't care. Okay, they didn't leave a message. Okay. Dang it, I forgot what I was.
It's fixing the power button. Can't get the parts.
Yeah, so so there wasn't any easy way to fix it, and I mean, they weren't in a huge hurry, but they still wanted it back in a timely manner. So like, and honestly, like what it is like, this particular machine had been kind of transitioned to like the owner's wife had it now, and so I think she uses it for like bookkeeping and stuff. So he loves these humongous cases, she not so much. So I ended up like just pulling all the guts out, putting it in. It's still an ATX case, but it is a little bit smaller, so she was happy with it. So whatever. Got that all done. So we had this Cosmos case just sitting here. Couldn't really use it for anything because the power button's screwed up. And I was looking at it, and it's like, if I drill out the rivets to hold in the kind of the piece that's for the 5 1/4 and 3 1/2 inch bays, like kind of the other side of it, then I would just have this like big empty space in the middle. Really? Actually, let me check the door real quick because I am waiting on a delivery.
I'm not editing this out. I'm keeping this in the podcast.
Well, let me check
just
the door.
So you know.
Ugh.
This is delightful. Oh man. See, this happens to me. It's just that I would get like a text or a call if something terrible was happening in production and I had to deal with the issue remotely.
Nope, there's no FedEx driver there, so I don't know who's calling.
All right, well.
That's annoying. Now I forgot what it was again.
You had this case and you had all this space up front if you made some modifications.
Yeah, so if I drill out the rivets and stuff for this piece, then I just have this big empty cavern on the inside of this case. And the other cool thing with it is that I don't have, like, it has like toolless panels, so you just pull like a lever and like you can get the panel off, the side panel off of there. And so I was looking at it and looking at it. It's like, it has obviously it has an ATX power supply mount. It's like I could put my computer, because I'd have the whole computer in the ATX housing there at the bottom of it. And the other thing is, like, I kind of go into this in the build log, but the original idea with my little build was that it would just have the intake fan on the top, and the motherboard would be facing up, and the video card would be sitting on top of it. So CPU cooling would have sucked, but whatever. But because of stuff, I ended up having to flip the motherboard so that way the video card has its own intake on top, and then there's vents on the bottom for the CPU cooler. So I needed. So I mean, I can't use it like a normal ATX power supply, because normal ATX power supplies don't have intake vents on both the top and the bottom. But this case does have an intake vent on the bottom for when you put the power supply, like with the fan facing down, so you can use the dust filter. But then, like, above it's just kind of open space. There's not like a shroud or anything like there is on some of the newer cases. Right. So like that way both sides of my case would be ventilated. And then, like, unusually, the original Cosmos, the interior frame's actually aluminum. So it's actually, even though it's humongous, it's actually not that heavy. Like it's not nearly as heavy as it looks. And like, if you ever look at pictures of it, it's got handles, like the handles that go on top, and like they kind of double as the feet, the ones on the bottom. But it's just like a bar that goes across the left and right sides across the top and bottom of the case. So the bottom ones are feet, top ones are like a handle. It's like I was looking at it and like, So it's aluminum, so I can modify it pretty easily. Like, there's good room and ventilation for my build. And I measured it, and I can fit a 22-inch LCD inside this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out some way, because I have my normal monitor, like I'm looking at it right now, is it's a Dell 22-inch. It's an ultra sharp, so it's a business model, and it has VESA mounts on the back of it. So if I drill some holes in the motherboard tray and then put some like big old washers to kind of distribute the load, I can mount the monitor to the motherboard tray on the inside. So then I have like this computer, which I can conveniently lug around with these handles, and it's actually not that heavy because it's aluminum. And I can I can conveniently pop the side panel off with a little latch. So I could take it to a LAN, plop it on the desk. It's like, I'm ready, guys. Plug it in, pop the side panel off. There's my monitor. There's my computer. There's plenty of room to stick a keyboard and mouse on this thing somewhere. Yeah, I'll have my kind of ATX case that's actually a ready-to-go battle station. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's going to be cool. So that's kind of like the second act. Right now, I'm just kind of get the case all done before I even mess with that. Just make sure that all works. But I'm really looking forward to it, because it'll be hilarious just showing up at a LAN with this Cooler Master Cosmos and nothing else.
Oh, Lord, that's great. And on that note, I think we shall end this fine episode. Just us two, James and Joshua of Low Volume. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us. We'll be back, hopefully, in a few weeks, and also hopefully with a few more folks. We apologize. We've had some last-minute cancellations and various other scheduling conflicts, making it a bit difficult to get this podcast on track, but we'll be right back on schedule fairly soon. This has been myself, Joshua Ramirez, a.k.a. PlayfulPhoenix, joined by James Schell, a.k.a. Aibohphobia. Thank you so much for listening. See you then.